Well, what are like this idea of people lying? I think this is actually a good thread to go on because when you're buying a business, there's always that question of can I trust? And we talk about this all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Offers are made based off numbers, but deals consummate based on trust at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
Trust and verify. And if you can't verify to the point of trusting, the deal's not going to happen or it should happen. And that's a two-way street, right? It's got to go both ways. What are some things that you recommend to your clients as far as vetting somebody, right? And just, how do you tell if somebody's telling you the truth? Obviously, if you catch them in a bold lie like that, that's pretty obvious. But then second of all, what are some things that you do to try and lay down the foundation for a good deal where, look, there's mutual respect and the buyer and seller can be like, looking at each other, I trust you. We're still going to go through this process, but you're an upstanding person and I want to do a deal with you.
Right. So let me start from the second question and move to the first, because on the buyer side, I think you can screw it up from the beginning, particularly if you're a new buyer. So when you first start out as a buyer, everybody line up 100 new buyers, right? Especially like went to college, thinking some finance, whatever. The first meeting you're going to have with the seller, you're going to want to have a list of like 50 questions that you want to ask. And I'm going to nail them with question 37 and 17. Oh, I'm going to get them. And you start ticking off these questions, right? And you totally forget who you're talking to. You're talking to an entrepreneur who started a business, who got it to the point where you were interested in buying it. And now you're like, like clipboard questioning him like he's in the principal's office. And you forgot the fact that this is a free man or a free woman that before you buy their business doesn't have to answer to anyone. You mess up a lot of trust in that. Get to know the person, understand their motives, be a good steward. I'm a big fan of How to Win Friends and Influence People. You speak in other people's terms, not your own. That's the first way you convey trust to your seller. I think the second way you do it is all of the touch points between the first time you meet somebody like Mark and his guys at Quiet Light to the closing table. When you say you're going to deliver something, deliver it at that date or before. And if it's going to be late, which happens in diligence, tell them. And if you can call them and tell them, calling's better than emailing. But tell them you're going to be late. But each point is giving that person confidence in whether you can deliver that big check that you're going to have to deliver to buy the company. And so those missed deadlines and other capacities don't matter as much as this one. Now let's flip it. Go ahead.
For those that are listening in the car or somewhere else, not watching this on YouTube, my head's about to fall off because I'm nodding so much about that. But this game is so much about managing expectations. And on the sell side, I can tell you, especially first-time sellers, they don't believe you're going to come through with a check. Like, just assume that that's the starting position. And so when you fail to deliver on expectations during that due diligence process, it doesn't seed sows of doubt. It confirms the seeds of doubt that are already there. Yes. So if I could just emblazon what you just said there, if you're going to miss a deadline, cool, I get it. It's hard work to buy a business, right? And you're going to miss some deadlines. You're going to have some more questions in your first round.
Right.
Well, communicate.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Sorry. I couldn't.
No, I think that's perfect. Well, what I think people will like listening to this podcast particularly is I represent the buyers that negotiate against the sellers that Mark works for. Think about all the times we've agreed already. And I'm not being nice just because, it's Mark. I'm telling the straight truth. So there's a lot of commonalities here. The other thing I think related to that is this is not a situation where you get perfect data. There are things that a seller will tell Mark that seller will never tell you, that Mark will never tell you. And not off of being particularly or maliciously avoidant, but just they're so specific, nuanced, hard to communicate, difficult to go past that they're not going to be told. So for instance, when the seller says, hey, Mark, I don't think this Elliott guy can close. You might get that the second or third time the seller tells him that, because at that point, Mark's sort of like, if you don't tighten up, this thing is done. But you're not going to hear that, right? And what I would encourage people on both sides to do, particularly like new acquisition entrepreneurs, I said, don't bring the clipboard with the 50 questions. be involved in the communication so you pick up some of the nuances of it, so that when people are communicating things indirectly or through nonverbals that they can't really say directly or in email, that you're not the dude that or the gal that just lets it go over your head.
Yeah, no, and that's right. I mean, and yeah, there are conversations that happen, right? And much of what we do on our side, and you on your side as well, you said this already. Sometimes it's putting your client in check a little bit to say, hey, let's pump the brakes. And we'll do that when our client is freaking out and we look at the deal and we see you don't need to be, right? Let's slow down a little bit here before you say, oh, it's not going to close the deal. This is actually fairly normal. So let's calm down a little bit. And then if they're really insistent, I might call you and I might kind of be like, look, let's tighten this up a little bit. Let's do X, Y, or Z, or just some feedback. And I'll sanitize it so that it's not, sometimes people get emotional. They say, the guy's an idiot. Like, he doesn't know what he's doing. I'm not going to say that.
Right. Exactly.
Like, no, I know they're speaking from emotion. They're speaking from frustration. So you're right on that. And again, it's the communication. I wish more buyers would do this, where we just set up regular calls. And I recommend it on my deal, set up regular calls. Even if we have nothing to talk about, it'll be a nice quick call, but let's at least do it.
Yeah. Totally agree. Weekly calls are great. I encourage them. To your point, I know I'm talking to the guy this week. So if I don't like him, I can yell at him and get over it. If I love him, I can tell him. If he's delivering everything, we can say, let's push the date up a week. And if he needs to tell me something that I don't want to hear, at least he told me. I totally agree with that. And like on my side, on the buyer side, how do you get a sense on the seller's trust factor? How well can you trust the seller, right? So there's 2 or 3 things you must do in this instance, right? First off, you must understand why the seller is selling. When I first got into the business, I thought that was some nebulous pontification type question. Oh, I mean, he told me that, he's going from Colorado and he's moving to Maryland, so he had to sell the business, or he got tired and he's been in it 10 years and he wants to do something else, or he's tired of it. And what I would say is that most times the thing that a seller can do to give me trust initially is have a real compelling story on why he's selling, because people don't sell assets that are throwing off good cash that's going better for the buyer than the seller very often. Now it happens, but things like retirement, things like health issues, things like you already have a house in the Bahamas and your wife's about to leave you if you don't go move to that house. Those are things that at a visceral level I can understand. The ones that don't feel all that compelling because of the pain that people go through during due diligence, I question. So the first thing is just, why is the guy selling? The second thing is, it's almost a complete opposite of what I said about the buyer conveying trust. So when the seller, look, in all of these businesses, online, offline, this is not physics, like engineering, like I was when I was an undergrad. Like, the numbers are not going to be exactly the same, folks. So understand there's going to be naturally some changes. But when the revenue matches the sales, matches what you see on the balance sheet, when all those things match consistently, and if something's going to be sort of grossly off, if the seller or the seller's broker tells you, hey, there's a big difference between taxes and financials. Let me tell you how private company tax preparation works and how nobody likes overpaying Uncle Sam. If they convey the old SHIT moments to you ahead of time, that's confidence. And then keep in mind the third way, and these are like 3 ways you got to sort of check for trust. Something negative is going to happen during your diligence process. I mean, I hope I'm wrong. But almost every time something happens, right? Like that moment you talked about, like every deal has that. In that moment, does the person tell you when it happens, when they knew it was going to happen, the last minute, or not at all? And depending on how they bring that information to bear is a huge indication of how trustworthy you are. So for instance, one guy might say, hey, I got 3 salespeople, or I've got 2 marketers, and I'm hearing one might go away, and it would be a pain, but we could figure something out to replace him. I'm already putting a requisition out. I just want you to know in case it happens. That's on like the very proactive end, right? The other person, you look at interim financials halfway through your diligence process and you see the marketing spend cut in half.
Right.
And so there's very different trust factors in those two ways. And there's others, but I think those three are very clear ways to check the trust.